Govan, I'm sure you're excited to talk with all of our healthcare workers today and share
Uh,
some of your wonderful knowledge with them.
well, I'm sure, if we really if it was in person, I would love to hear their knowledge as well. One of the things that we know in suicide prevention, mental health is that we always have to keep on learning. And one of the things I try to do each day is try to find something new in suicide prevention. So, because there's so much information out there
Yeah.
and new things going on. Um, but if we keep on the forefront of suicide, that way we get to save a lot more lives that are out there that are really struggling right now.
Yeah. Well, I think it's five after, so we're going to get started. I want to say hello to everyone and welcome to Marvin's Suicide Prevention webinar. My name is Jacinta Harmon, and I am the Director of Clinical Services here at Marvin Behavioral Health. I'm a licensed clinician in Pennsylvania, and my superpower is that I was born and raised in Ireland. So I tell everyone that's my superpower. But Marvin Behavioral Health is a comprehensive mental health company that was created specifically for those who work in healthcare, on healthcare teams, and who work in all different departments. We know that it takes a village to run a hospital, so we're very excited you're here today. Before we begin, I just want to acknowledge, and I'm sure Govan the same, that this topic can feel very heavy and can bring about emotions. If you've lost someone to suicide, we are so very sorry for your loss. And please know that it's okay to step away from this if you need to take a moment to take care of yourself. This is being recorded and you can always watch it later. And you're not alone. If you need immediate support, you can call or text 988 to connect with a suicide and crisis lifeline. Um, this campaign that we have running this month is called We Notice, We Act. And today we gather under that theme. And it's a reminder that prevention begins with awareness and small caring actions. By noticing the signs and reaching out to people, each of us can make a huge difference and bring hope to someone in need. And that is what we hope to do today. We want to connect you and the people that you may know who are struggling. We want to connect them to hope. This conversation matters, especially among healthcare workers, because recent research indicates a worrying trend. Many healthcare workers are at a significantly higher risk to die by suicide or to have thoughts of suicide. And with that, I would love to introduce Govan Martin, the founder and executive director and chair of Suicide Prevention Alliance in Pennsylvania. Um, Govan's company is a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to initiating vital conversations about suicide prevention, reducing stigma, and most importantly, delivering evidence based training to communities across Pennsylvania and beyond. Govan's work is deeply personal. He lost his brother Michael to suicide. And I believe that this experience drives his mission to normalize conversations around suicide and help save lives. Govan, would you care to say hello?
Hello, everybody. I'm excited to be here. I want to thank Jacinta for inviting me to be here today, and Marvin. One of the big things is that this is hugely personal. As Jacinta said, I lost my brother Michael 45 years ago. And a lot of people think that, oh, that's so long ago, you should be okay by now. Well, no, I think about my brother every day. My brother is in my heart, which uh, has given me the mission to make sure that I advocate for more help out there, more awareness, more action, as Jacinta said, that we can do, sometimes small, sometimes big, to make a difference in people's lives. So thank you for uh, talking with me today.
Oh, well, thank you for being here. I think the first thing that we wanted to talk about are the signs because I really feel like this could help people to understand, to look for the signs. They're different for everybody. Sometimes they're opposite extremes. There's direct signs and then there's indirect signs. So if you could kind of like go through this slide with us and then talk a little bit, about the obvious signs versus the indirect signs, that would be great.
Sure. So when someone dies by suicide, one of the things we want to look at is what were the precipitating factors? What was going on in their lives? Also, when, before someone dies, hopefully we can find these signs and look for them and start asking questions. So, what's going on with that person? So, one of the biggest things that we really see overall that is a big factor in suicidality is relationship issues.
Yeah.
Usually, we find that prior to when they're having thoughts of suicide, but also in the aftermath that we see that relationship factors are one of the biggest indicators of someone either thinking about suicide or dying by suicide. So, and it doesn't have to be an intimate partner relationship. It could be a relationship issue with a parent. It could be a relationship issue with coworkers or their kids or someone that has what we call a strong dose relationship that would that they're close to or um, that really make a difference in their lives. So if there's a breakup of or some type of relationship, then huge indicator that someone might be thinking about suicide. Obviously, that goes with divorce as well, um, but also financial issues. You know, one thing we're going to go through all these layoffs, loss or change of something. That's what we find a lot in suicide, loss and change, or especially loss by suicide in their family or a close friend. Uh, if that happens, usually that person, uh, those loss survivors, as we call them, those who've lost loved ones to suicide, are 4 times greater than the general public than to attempt and die by suicide. So life changes are really huge with people. Um, Direct signs, talking about or stating they want to die. Uh, Very common. Sometimes people actually will state directly, I want to kill myself. I don't want to live anymore. Um, and also some direct signs are possibly if someone buys a gun and it's unusual for them to purchase a weapon or acquiring a lethal means, as we say. So it might be, buying pills, it might be buying a rope. So a lot of the top three lethal means used are firearms. Right now, it's at a 54% rate in the country. Then hanging, unfortunately, which is around 28%, and then medication, which is around 20%. So there are those are the top three, and then all other methods combined are the direct signs. But
If
sometimes, go ahead,
Sorry,
Jacinta.
I was going to say under the direct signs, there are statements that we can listen for, right? Statements such as, "Oh, you'd be better off without me," just really blatant statements that sometimes we tend to brush away. Could you talk about that just a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, like you just said, you know, you'd be better off without me. I'd be better off dead. I'm just a burden to people. Um, I don't care about life anymore. Those are very strong indicators. Just blatantly, I want to kill myself. That 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 often happens. But really, we have to be aware because people often will say, "It's like, oh, come on, you don't want to do that. That's ridiculous," and brush it off as just someone having a hard day. But we have to be aware of those, statements and really dig into that. We have to say, so tell me what's going on. That doesn't sound like you. We have to take each statement of suicide seriously. And if we brush them off, sometimes they won't come back to us again. So, as your jobs, you hear some things all the time, but sometimes the people that work in this field don't listen to our family and friends. So we have to be aware of not just when we go to work, but when we go home too, because unfortunately our friends and family also die by suicide.
Yeah. And I think some of the behavioral cues that we often miss sometimes is that people withdraw, right? They withdraw from family, friends, social engagements. Um, Sometimes you see increased risk taking, maybe reckless driving, um, things like that. And then maybe it's indirect, but sometimes I have seen some of my clients, they give away things that are important to them. They'll come in and they'll try to give me something to say, hey, I want you to have this. It's something that it seems like a sudden burst of generosity or just giving away a valued belonging, but it's a huge indicator.
Right. And talk about not just like direct statements or but
Mm-hmm.
also indirect statements are out there too. I want to go to sleep and not wake up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, um, Life would be better off without me. Not necessarily a statement about suicidality, um, but we have to be aware of those statements as well. And if something doesn't sound right, it probably isn't right. So that's why we have to dig in and ask the questions and not and sit with somebody and just have a conversation. One of the themes to our organization is start the conversation to connect to hope. And starting the conversation doesn't necessarily mean someone asking for help. Starting the conversation can come from the other side about being proactive and just saying, "Hey, I'm really worried about you. You don't seem the same anymore." Um, like also too, there's a ton of warning signs. Not every warning sign might be an indicator of suicide, but we won't know unless we ask. One of the things that you have on the life changing side is loss. So, but also loss and change in someone's life to almost sometimes the extreme or sometimes to the minor things, but they could be big things to that person. So we have to be aware of what we see around that person. Some people who are thinking about suicide start isolating themselves and will, especially those who are gregarious and outgoing, that they might
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden start staying in their room and maybe just vegging out in front of the TV or not even doing the things that they enjoy anymore. So if we look out for the changes that are in someone's life and maybe the loss indicators, one of the things we talked about just a second ago was if we lost someone to suicide in our life and or we lost just a loved one, a mentor or someone that's close to us who just happens to die from natural causes, we still have to be aware because that could really impact someone's life. So again, if we look for change and loss in someone's life, that might be an indicator that someone might be thinking about suicide.
And I think those behavioral cues are important because one of the things I remember from the QPR training, was the discussion we had around situational triggers. And we might not even know about these things. Somebody is diagnosed with an illness and they don't tell other people about it. And so they keep it to themselves. There's legal problems, financial problems. They're embarrassed. They don't share those. Um, History of trauma and abuse sometimes that went unaddressed or it was untreated. And, just triggers in a healthcare system can bring that all back to you. And so that's why I think that the behavioral clues are very important to pay attention to because they might not say it out loud and say, oh, I'm just a burden to people, but if you notice a change in their behavior, it is that's a big one.
Absolutely. And I think again, we have to, if we notice something, let's just not sit on it. Let's actually start talking to the individual. Start asking questions. The more we ask questions, the more we're going to find out. I think one of the biggest problems is that, is normalizing the conversation about suicide.
Yeah.
And the more we normalize that conversation, the better it's going to be for people reaching out for help because people won't reach out for help because they're afraid of being judged.
Hmm.
And the stigma is truly still there in suicide. And but if we listen to people and we sit them down and we talk calmly with somebody, most people will open up to us.
Yeah.
And especially if one of the big things that I always say is listen without judgment. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's hard for us, right? Especially if it's our own family. How could you do this? Or why would you do this? When we could just say, you know what? It doesn't matter what you say to me. I want you to talk to me because I care
Yeah.
about you, because I love you. To clients, it's just saying, whatever you say to me, it stays in here and I'm here to help you. So the more we work together, the more we say we and us and together, the better that individual is going to feel actually that they have a say and how they can be helped.
So this slide is Govan's yikes slide. What if they say yes? Because that I think is the biggest fear for most people asking the question. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time on this so that we can give people some skills as, what to do with that if somebody says, "Yeah, I am. I just feel like my family would be better off without me, or that I don't make a difference." So if they say yes, Govan, what would be some skills that you could give people to help them to not panic and to just kind of quietly sit with that person and stay calm?
Yeah. So, when I was thinking about, what's the scariest part when we're working with people, or if they're in our own family and friend network. And then again, the main thing is in talking to somebody who might be thinking about suicide is still have to ask the question, uh, especially when they are not stating it out loud. So again, if we notice those changes in somebody, that we have to think, okay, person's not right. And I always start off with what I've noticed in that person, or what they've stated in the last couple of weeks, or what I've seen with the clues. And then I'll ask the question, are you thinking about suicide? And we have to state it directly. We can't state it like, you're not thinking about suicide, are you? You wouldn't do anything dumb or crazy, would you? And that's how most people ask it, unfortunately, in the public, because we want the person to say no. But unless we ask it directly, just by stating, hey, I've noticed that, you're isolating. I noticed that your change in behavior is extreme. You're drinking a lot right now when you never really drank before. I noticed that, also that you're having relationship issues with your spouse, or partner, or just even your friends. So I got to sit down with you right now and ask you, are you thinking about suicide? But even when I do that, and I've been doing this now for about 25 years, working with people who are thinking about suicide, like a red flag pops up in my mind and it's waving all over the place. Do I want the person to say yes? But at the same time, if they are, absolutely, I want to say that person to say yes, because that's where the real work begins. So if they do
Mm.
say yes, our jobs are kind of just go, okay, I'm glad you told me. I am so thankful that uh, you showed a lot of courage and just sitting here with me here right now and telling me that you're having thoughts about suicide, because I really want to help you. I really care. So we stay calm, because the more we stay kind of, we're afraid to have that discussion with people who are thinking about suicide. Also, they get nervous too. So the more calm that we remain, the better, actually, usually the person will trust us that much more into knowing what to do. So we want to stay calm. We want to start asking them and being inquisitive about what's going on with you. So, I kind of know when I asked you the question, I told you what I've seen, but can you tell me what the real reason is on why you're thinking about suicide? And hopefully you get, um, them to tell you what's going on. But we have to sit and we have to listen and we have to remain calm. And if we remain calm, again, and confident, actually, people will actually share with us what's going on. So, and it could come in waves. Sometimes I say people like to, especially if you're the first person that they've told, sometimes they'll, what I call verbal vomit. They'll just like dump all over and they'll say, oh my God, this is going on, this is going on, this is going on. Or it might be the one issue that they're thinking of, which could be a relationship issue, or it could be uh, financial issue. But one thing that we know about suicide, it's usually never just one issue. There's one usually predominant issue, but there's always a few underlying issues as well. So we have to actually find out more information as far as what else is going on besides the predominant issue. And then knowing that, hey, we can't fix people who are thinking about suicide. But what we can do is we can work together and see what they would like to do, and work together to say, you know what, we can we can get you help, but what does help mean to you? So all these issues have to come together, and sometimes, when we talk to people, it could take, you know I think the least amount of time I've talked to somebody and the getting them help was 45 minutes, but then sometimes it's 5 hours because you want the hard part is actually getting them and persuading them to get help.
And I think an important point to bring up here, and I learned this in QPR, was you're not here to be the therapist. You're not here to make promises. It's important not to make promises. Oh, I won't tell anybody. I'll keep your secret, because part of part of when they say yes, and part of, kind of getting the information is, if it is serious, if they do have access to means, if they do have a plan, that's information that you would need to give to the person who you find to help the person. And so you're like on a fact finding mission. Is that kind, you're caring, but at the same time you're paying attention to the information that you're being given.
So my background is I was also a state trooper for 29
Hmm.
years.
Yes, you were.
So, and it's almost like doing an investigation, but doing it from the personal touch. So, but also I was at the last 12 years of my career, I was in charge of a peer support program where we did talk to a lot of troopers and their families who were thinking about suicide. So it is being inquisitive, but again, it can't be, with a spotlight on you and digging in and saying, where were you at such and such a time and such a place? But it might be just really just digging in and say, uh, I am so sorry you're going through this. And I can't imagine what you're going through. So tell me, some things that are going on. Tell me why you're having these thoughts about suicide. Your voice and your body language and your confidence make all the difference in the world. So, again, if we look like we don't care and we act like we don't care, or we're asking questions that are, not really necessarily the person, uh, but just for our own information, it's not going to make sense to the person. So it's asking those caring questions and validating what they're feeling. So, because if someone tells us something important, we have to acknowledge that and say, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. One of the two ugliest words that we often say in our personal lives and sometimes in work is I understand. And that is disconnecting. One of the things that we have to do is connect to individuals. And we can't necessarily say I understand because we do not. And we could have had similar circumstances that that they're telling us about, but we're not in their shoes. So we really have to concentrate about their story and not necessarily float around to what happened to us in our past. One of the key questions we always ask is like on a scale from 1 to 10, where are you at? So you can gauge on somebody's, seriousness of their thoughts of suicide. Usually, and they can tell us, I'm on an 8 or I'm on a 2 or wherever. But also, when they talk to us, we have to look out for their own body language. We have to hear what they're saying because you should be using checkoff blocks. Because especially if it's on our personal lives, we can't be writing down notes. That's not what people want. They want us to listen and they want us to care. So, what we're listening for, I've been thinking about this for 6 months. I have, a plan to do this. I have the lethal means. So, and also ask when they are doing it. So, or how serious are you? The plan that you might have. So, and one of the big myths out there is always, that if you talk about suicide, that's going to put the thought in their head. And I know you all know that, but it's always a good reminder that you're not putting any thoughts in someone's head. It's just listening to their story and getting, hopefully, what they're going through so that we can help them.
And I think it's important to ask about means as well. Access to means, because that, pills could be stocked up. Somebody may have recently bought a gun, or they have a gun, things like that, or they've have a plan and they, bought a rope. And so that is very important information to get from somebody in a kind way, because that kind of shows an act of planning and furtherance that would be important to know.
Yeah. So all those things on that slide, we have to ask people just to see where they're at. And the more we see with that, then we can start. And actually, myself and Jacinta were talking prior to this, and one of the things we talked about is um, not if we don't ask those questions, then we don't know. So we have to ask to ensure that, um, and not to problem solve before while listening. Like someone's going to tell us what, yes, I bought a gun. I'm going to do it on Saturday. And sometimes when the beginning of the conversation and that verbal vomit takes place, is that often people will, as we all do, would like to problem solve. We like to fix the problem before actually someone is even completed telling us their story. So really we have to, and it's hard to listen. It is hard to listen to someone's pain, especially someone's pain that they're thinking about ending their life or the circumstances on what they've been through. Because sometimes we think about, oh my God, that person is in so much pain. But then as we're thinking that, they're telling us more and more information. And then we kind of lose them because we have to, in our own minds, as they're telling us, again, we have to think about what they're telling us, but also where we're going to refer that person to as well. But we can do that afterwards. And along the way, after they complete telling us their story, I always ask people and just say, so what I've heard is you're having a relationship, you're going through a divorce, that you gambled all your money away, that your kids hate you because now you can't send them to college. Those kind of things that and I have a plan and I have the means to do it. And my firearm is in my nightstand, and I'm going to do it on the anniversary of my father's death. All those things matter, and we have to listen then to pass along the story to somebody else.
And I think another important point, we were talking about this last week, is that not everyone who dies by suicide has a mental health issue. You know, suicide, it doesn't discriminate. The points that you're bringing up about gambling away money, having a health issue, they lost a loved one and they just want to be with that loved one. There may be no signs that there was any mental health issue present prior to just them making the decision. And sometimes people very quietly go about doing these things, and you know, it's the behavior changes that we notice. It's the just the quietness sometimes. But important to know that it's
I was
not
just going to,
always it's not always a mental health issue.
right. So uh, evidence shows that I think one of the last studies was 54% of people who die by suicide did not have a known mental health illness. Doesn't say that they didn't, but known. And I would say it's probably from what I've seen, it's some of it's mental health, some of it's environmental factors.
Yeah.
Uh, because of that relationship, because of financial issues, because of anything that's important to them, their identity being stripped away. One of the highest percentages of people who die by suicide is men 65 and older. And if we really think about it, a lot of this is common sense. We lose our identities as we get older. Like for men, 65 and older, and for women in that age bracket also, is that we start to lose our health, that people are starting to die around us, that we sometimes we get our privileges taken away, like a driver's license. We also have illnesses. So things in suicide make sense to why people die by suicide. And most people, they say about 70% of people will give warning signs, which
Mm.
is great that we can now, hopefully, if we know a little bit of knowledge, that we can help a lot of people just by listening and just by starting to ask the question. So if we do those little things, that big headways can be made into saving people's lives.
Yes. And I'd like to, also kind of just talk a little bit about something you said earlier. In our heads, we're jumping ahead to how am I going to get this person? Where am I going to refer them to? And that's the third part of QPR, right? Question, persuade, refer. So could we talk a little bit about, referring them to the right resource, kind of helping them to know what to do or where to go, because that that would maybe create some calm here among those of us who've heard somebody say, yes, you know what, I am going to die. I want to
Yeah,
die.
yeah. So again, when after we're persuaded that they get help, which is the hardest part, and as I said, it could be, um, intervention could last 45 minutes or hours to convince somebody to get help. But again, that's our jobs into and our knowledge in suicide. Where would we refer people to? We could start by calling, especially a lot of people uh, just maybe having a passive suicide thought, which could just be, I want to kill myself, but yet I would never do it because of my faith or because of my loved ones or my kids or whoever. But then some people, again, have more serious thoughts, and we have to know where to refer them. So, but if someone's having thoughts of suicide, then we have to actually refer them to somebody. We just can't let that go. So you can always start out with 988. Um, and that's kind of the basic. But then also, I want to know resources before someone's telling me, where do I refer them to? And I always vet my resources so that I know where I would send somebody. Let's say I would know who to call. So actually, I was doing a uh, um, speech for law survivors last week in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, and someone asked me after the speech and said that their father died by suicide, and that person went to two mental health professionals who didn't take seriously um, his feelings in the aftermath of his father dying. And he also talked about his job was working on the railroad, um, and he often saw the aftermath of suicides on the railroad. So he had somebody tell him he had PTSD, but no one could help him. So I asked Jacinta, actually right before this started, where can we send this person and does she have any resources? So it's trying to find those resources then to help somebody. And there's national resources that we can refer to, or you can go to your local county crisis line, which every county has. But also find the resources in your community, find resources that that are trained usually better in suicidality than others are, um, which sometimes is hard to find. A lot of people are trained in depression, grief, but sometimes not necessarily how to talk to somebody who is having thoughts about suicide. Uh, and also, it's incumbent upon us to define those resources to help people, but also take the training that's going to make us a lot better on
Yeah.
finding out information about what we can do and
And
being.
I think familiarizing yourself as well with the internal resources at where you work, because a lot of these systems where we have contracts have internal resources. There's websites that you can go to for every state that you live in that, kind of will give you a list of different places to go, and then knowing locally what's available is
Yeah,
important
but
too, because
even in the
it
workplace,
takes away the nervousness of knowing where to bring somebody.
right? Even in the workplace. So, when I was in the state police, we had an employee assistance program that's a state offered. We had our peer support program. But one of the things that, was hard to do is to find out those clinicians in each county of the state for those to refer to, for not just for suicidality, but for all the different emotions that people go through, and that understood the law enforcement lifestyle. So if we're looking at suicidality, we want to find those clinicians that have that knowledge and can help people a lot better. But at the very basic, where you start in the workplace is an employee assistance program, right? Which hopefully they know, but that requires us to be inquisitive of them as well. Do they know where to refer somebody to and what to do? And obviously, HR and the other resources that you might find in your community that, hey, they might just have a little bit of extra knowledge and can be very helpful to the person who's thinking about suicide. So it's our work that we have to do ourselves. to educate ourselves, one, in suicidality, but also to find those resources that are out there as well.
Yeah. In listening to you talk and thinking about trying to help people, they should get other people involved, right? You don't have to do this by yourself. If somebody has agreed that they want you to let them get help, then if you could be in a family member or a loved one or a supervisor or other people, so that, because it's hard for you as the person who hears that somebody wants to die by suicide. You need to check in on yourself too. You need to know that you don't have to take the responsibility for this person's life all on your own. And if you can get that person to allow you to bring other people in, one of the things I remember you saying is, scroll through the phone, see who on their list of contacts is somebody that they would, share this information with and allow to support them as well.
Yeah, sometimes when people are thinking about suicide and they're obviously serious about their thoughts and they do have a plan, oftentimes their irrational brains are going all over the place. But as we talk to people, it's funny that in using our calmness and our confidence, we're de-escalating that person. And and sometimes they're able to think more clearly, but sometimes what they'll say to us is, "You're the only person that can help me." That's not what we want. We want to bring in others. We do not want to be someone's sole support. We can't be that way from a clinician point of view, but we should never be that way from a loved one or a friend's point of view. So we need to bring in someone like, you know, a sibling or a parent or a friend, or again, who puts always, when I do the class, who puts people in their cell phones and their contacts? They do. So obviously there's going to be someone on their cell phone that might be helpful to them. They just have to take a look because, there's a lot going on with that people who are thinking about suicide. And again, they're not thinking clearly, that they think that they're alone in their feelings, that no one can understand them.
Yeah.
The fact that we're listening to them and the fact that we could probably find someone else on that list, either through their cell phone or just kind of floating ideas out there as well, that we can hopefully bring in not just one person, but maybe several people that can remind that person that they are loved and cared about, which is really important.
And to go back to the point that I just made as well, that it is really important to take care of yourself. It's a lot to hold. You're not a therapist, and that's okay. You should seek the support that you need as the person who is trying to help somebody else, and allow yourself to debrief. Talk to a friend, talk to somebody that you can trust. Marvin has a 24/7 helpline for free that you can utilize if you just, want to talk to somebody. In Ireland, we tend to say a problem shared is a problem halved, and it's okay for you not to be okay when this happens, and it's okay for you to check in with yourself and see what you need as support as well.
I can't agree more. If we are clinicians or no clinicians, it is hard to, when we're involved in this work, is we're always taking care of others. And a lot of times we forget about ourselves, and boy, compassion fatigue can come out, or exhaustion come out from going above and beyond to help
Yeah.
people. So when I first started in peer support and helping people who again had a whole host of a variety of problems, including suicide, which obviously impacted me, that got to be overwhelming. But and when I first started, I was the biggest hypocrite, going, "Oh, you should go to therapy. You need it." And and here I never went to therapy because I always thought therapy was laying on a couch and a guy in a pipe and a tweed jacket and a goatee, and it's not. So I urge everybody who uh, has in the fields that we're in, if they haven't gone to therapy, to go to therapy, just so they can tell, I went to therapy to normalize the conversation. But more importantly, is taking that self-care for yourself, because this can be overwhelming, especially for those who have been impacted by suicide in their lives, or just because we help people all the time and we forget about our self-care. So hopefully out there, I want you to think about, what is your self-care? What are you doing for you? So I ride the Peloton all the time. That's my self-care. So, but we all have to have that self-care in ourselves to really support what we're doing in our daily lives. And the more that we use self-care, the better that we're going to be to help others and to help ourselves.
I wanted to spend the last, few minutes, well, the last 10 minutes maybe talking about culture change and then leave time for Q&As. But in organizations where we have people who dedicate themselves to the care of others, um, and who operate by the concept of do no harm, what steps do you think, Govan, that people could make to promote suicide prevention? I know that we've talked a lot about normalizing the conversation and talked about suicidal language. Could we talk about that just a little bit?
Sure. As I said before, one of the things I try to do is learn at least one thing more about suicide prevention every day. And the more that we use our voice, the more that we talk about suicide, the more that we can save lives. One of the things, again, suicide is still highly stigmatizing. Revolving around suicide. Um, but but they think that it's a conversation no one wants to have. So whenever I go do trainings out of state, or get a hotel room, usually hotel clerk will ask, "So why are you here?" And I'll say, "Doing a training." "Oh, what are you training in?" "Suicide prevention." Everybody has a story. Everybody has,
Mm.
for the most part, been impacted by suicide. I'm sitting beside somebody in a plane. Where are you going? I'm going to a suicide prevention conference. My gosh, well, I lost a loved one to suicide, or I work in suicide prevention, or whatever. So it's getting that conversation started. That's, again, part of that theme that we have in our organization. If we start the conversation, more people will hopefully start the conversation around us too, and can be helpful into not just being one or two people talking about suicide, but a whole host of people. We really need to also educate ourselves through trainings. There's a lot of good basic trainings. QPR is a good basic trainer out there. But then there's a 2-day training called SIS training, Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training, which does a lot of role play. So those are good training. One of the biggest innovators in training, which I absolutely love, and I wish I was a clinician because I would use it all the time, is called CAMS Care. CAMS Care stands for Collaborative Assessment and Management of Suicidality, created by Dr. David Jobs, who is a world-renowned expert in suicidality. And as he would say, I'm a big fanboy of his, because I am. He is amazing, and that he believes that unless really needed, that you don't have to go necessarily for inpatient to get help, but through outpatient and treating the drivers of suicide, such as relationship issues, job issues, those things we talked about before, which are driving people to take their own life. So with CAMS Care, which is one of the only trainings that's out there that's suicide specific, and the best part, it's really not that expensive, and you could be a CAMS Care um, person that has this training, which I think is the most advanced and the best training to help clinicians and mental health professionals that are in the field, and to helping those who are thinking about suicide. So if I can say anything, please make yourself aware of CAMS Care. If anybody's in Pennsylvania, that we usually do one yearly training. So if you want to take that training, please contact me. But again, not only trainings, again, is doing role plays, getting together, do trainings, do practice. Um, Tiny actions can make the biggest difference with people thinking about suicide. And the more knowledge that we have, and the more conversation uh, that we have, the more people will actually reach out and get help. Uh, you know, uh, the people I know what I do, like uh, one time recently, I got a message from somebody in high school who I hadn't talked to since I graduated high school many years ago. But he texted me at 1 o'clock in the morning. And usually if somebody texts me at 1 o'clock in the morning and I haven't heard from them, it's usually somebody who's probably having thoughts about suicide. And which is great because then I could, it doesn't take too long for the conversation to get started and for us to get into what we can do to help that person. So it's educating ourselves, making ourselves more aware, finding out those good trainings that are out there, and start that conversation. Those are some of the best things. If you have any reminders, Jacinda, with that.
Yeah, in my head,
Oh,
along with the things, yeah, in my head, along with the things that you were talking about, I was thinking, change how we talk about suicide. A lot of people use the word commit suicide, right? That 15 years ago we stopped saying that, was it, Govan?
About 15 to 20 years ago, we stopped saying that, but people in the field start using and still use that all the time. Give you a good example. There was a past Surgeon General from the U.S. who had retired, and he came to this one of the largest conferences about suicide in the country, and he kept on using the word commit suicide. I have a hard time; it gets stuck in my throat.
I know it does.
And that has changed to died by suicide, which we die from a car accident, we die from cancer, we die from all the means. Why aren't we using that language for suicide? And then also we put adjectives onto like an attempt survivor, like a failed attempt or an unsuccessful attempt. Which, can you imagine? And hospital personnel and mental health professionals talk to people who have that attempt. That's all we need to say, an attempt. We don't need to put failed attempt, unsuccessful, because people feel that. It's like, wow, you just call me a failure. Wow, I can't even kill myself right. But a lot of times now, again, the proper language is died by suicide. It was commit, and then we changed, or the suicide community went to complete, which they thought was a kind of better way to say it, but really it's not, because suicide is not an accomplishment. So, but if we use the right language, again, that because people are educating themselves who are impacted by suicide, and they know. So we have to use the right language, and it's the right way to say it. And one of the big reasons why we don't use commit, because it connotates a crime or a sin. And suicide, was thought about in a sin in many different denominations, but through education now, many different denominations know it's not an offense against God. It's just people who are suffering through their whatever issue that they have or through their mental health.
Yeah, and adding to that, I think around changing the language, tiny actions, managers being vocal and allowing themselves to be vulnerable, you know, resources that you have internally, your EAPs, your national hotlines, high quality mental health care support teams, as you mentioned, psychological safety training, suicide prevention training, suicide awareness campaigns. I mean, there's information out there if people are curious to learn about it and empower themselves. We do have a question in the Q&A that I wanted to make sure that we answer. And so that, and your experience as a state trooper will help us with that, Govan. Somebody asked the question about, wellness checks and when it's time to do a wellness check.
So usually wellness checks come from actually a loved one calling us and saying, hey, calling the police and saying, I'm worried about my husband, or, he, or wife or whoever, or that they're worried about the person. And usually what happens is that we would also come with crisis, that it's not just the police that would come, unless the person was, doing things that might be illegal. So, but if you're worried about somebody, maybe you're a neighbor, maybe you're a friend, and you heard that friend say, recently that, I want to kill myself, I don't want to live anymore, I can't take life anymore, that we can, or you can, out there in the public, call the police and say, can we have a wellness check? So we will, especially recently, police aren't necessarily going out by themselves. We're taking people who are trained, such as crisis, that county crisis team,
Yeah.
uh, with us to go out and talk to that person. So I urge everybody who knows somebody who's maybe a friend or family member not living in the same household to call and have a wellness check done by county crisis and law
Yeah.
enforcement.
I think the most important thing is not to worry about if it's appropriate and to do it because you're concerned. To listen to your spidey senses, listen to your intuition. And again, don't hold this on your heart by yourself, Look for help, seek
Yeah,
resources. A well-being check-in, it's not going on someone's record, it's just something that the police and a crisis team will do.
yeah, and oftentimes maybe that person is vulnerable enough to tell us, or the crisis team, yeah, I'm thinking about suicide, where we can get them help. So don't, if someone has thoughts about suicide, you don't know what to do, call somebody else. There's always somebody else that we can call to get that person help. And if you can't find somebody, hey, give me a phone call. One of the things that, sometimes people think we're a hotline all over the world. I've had several people call me from the Philippines. We are not a hotline, but they want to know where we can get help. And, there are world chat lines on our resource page. There's lots of different resources that are out there. We just want to find better resources that are out there, especially in our country. And there's 988. And the surprising fact about 988, there was an article in the New York Times several months ago that said only 20% of people in our country know about 988. We need to do a better job
Yeah.
uh, on educating people and knowing where the resources are at, and knowing where people can call. Like, a lot of people don't know where, that the county crisis line is somewhere we can call. Some people
Yeah.
go straight to law enforcement, and the county crisis is really, and where we live, one of the best resources that we can have.
Yeah. We're at 4 minutes of, and I wanted to make sure that we leave time for your Mr. Rogers quote, but I just wanted to thank everybody for being here. Rachel has been answering questions in the background, but I just want to say out loud that knowledge is more than information. It is a power to save lives, and by being here today and by attending this webinar, you got some information today and some knowledge. When we notice, we act, and we become that bridge to hope for someone who may feel that they have none. And so thank you for your time today, because suicide prevention is not only possible, it is preventable, it is personal, and each of us holds the power to be that life changing person in the lives of those we love and those we care about and those that we work with. So on that note, Govan, would you like to share your favorite Mr. Rogers quote with everybody?
Sure. But first, again, I want to echo what you said just at the end. That I thank you all for being here. Sometimes just a little bit more information can go a long way. And if you want to learn more information, you can go obviously to our website, suicidepreventionalliance.org. And just more importantly, thank you so much especially on behalf of my brother, for being here today and finding out a little bit more information. Because, I always think, if I'd have had this information, could I have saved my brother? But with that being said, I have the information hopefully to help a lot of other people, which I've had the privilege to do. So Mr. Rogers is one of my favorite people growing up, with him putting on a sweater and his slippers. And so, and I'm a Pittsburgh kid, and that's where Mr. Rogers was from as well. So I'm a big quote person, but one of the most significant quotes I find in helping people is actually from Mr. Rogers, because he did help a lot of kids, but I also, with what he said and done, helped a lot of adults at the same time. So Mr. Rogers once said, is that we get so wrapped up in numbers in our society, but the most important thing is that we're able to be one-to-one, you and I, with each other at the moment. And if we can be present in the moment, with the person that we happen to be with. That's what's important. So basically he's saying that if we're, you know, with the person, our family, our friends, those people who are thinking about suicide, if we're present and they know that, that's 90% of the battle, because we're showing that we care. Our presence is huge because maybe they don't have anybody else to show them that they care. So be that presence for somebody else. Again, thank you so much for being here. And thanks, Jacinta. Thanks, Rachel, for asking me to come.